Welcome to Pictures of the Past, Picture the Future, an Earth Week presentation. Brought to you by Bruce Power, Innovation at Work, and produced by the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center. Welcome to Earth Week feature brought to you by Bruce Power and the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center. I'm here today with Kristine Hammel, and she's going to be sharing with us a little bit from her farm near Allenford, and as well we'll be talking a little bit about some archives photos. So welcome, Kristine. Thanks for joining me today. And without further ado, I'm going to put something more interesting than just us up on the screen and share some photos here from your Instagram account that show a little bit of the farm. And can you tell us a little bit about the place you've chosen that we intended to interview in person, but are just interviewing virtually from today?
Drumlins, so we're kind of nestled between a couple of drumlins, and there's parts of the farm that are very sheltered because of that, and other parts that are quite exposed to winter winds.
So I'm sharing some images from your Instagram here from the farm, and the first one is one of the wet areas. Next up, we seem to have a hand in a nest.
Yeah, so that's my son. He's often out exploring the farm as well, and he was up about 20 feet in a spruce tree examining a nest he had found. And he actually got a measuring tape and measured the height he was at and also the nest. So the inside dimensions of the nest are 8 inches and the outside are 18 inches. We haven't actually seen a bird there, so we don't know whose home that is.
That's a pretty big nest. Here's hoping your son doesn't run into the bird when he's up in the tree.
Especially if that bird has laid nests and is feeling laid eggs in that nest and is feeling protective. Then I think he might not want to be 20 feet up right beside it anymore.
Absolutely. The next picture we've got looks like some of the early shoots coming up in the farm.
That might be. So I right now I'm just seeing an image of a big group of people making hay. I'm guessing quite some time ago in Bruce County, but I'm thinking if that's a recent picture, that's probably some garlic that's just come up this spring and is now growing. And so that's part of the market garden, and you'll see things are planted pretty close together, and usually the ground isn't bare. So in between the garlic, there's some leftover mulch that we put on from last year, which was just leaves that we raked up from beside the garden and put on the beds to protect the soil over winter.
Yes, I can see there it is the garlic. And just so our audience knows, Kristine is seeing the archives photos that we'll be looking at later. Next up, it looks like we've got some calves, lambs.
Exactly, lambing season. So we also have a small flock of sheep, and they are just in the midst of lambing. And there is a little bit of the Jacob breed in our flock, and that's why you're getting that lovely Holstein look with patches of white and black.
Yeah, it's so we'll move on now, and we'll look at some of the pictures from archives, just to make sure we're in the same place here. I am on that picture of the family haying, and when I look at it, the biggest thing I notice is the size of the family. That's a lot of people.
So just to check that we're looking at the same picture, I'm seeing a whole crowd, and there's some big hay wagons.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Perfect. So
Yeah.
we're on the same. So in terms of what's changed from then to now, I think what to me really sticks out in this picture is that just the number of people involved in agriculture 100 years ago in comparison to now. I think now if that amount of hay were being brought in, you would perhaps have one person on a tractor by themselves in a field. And 100 years ago, that this seems to have taken at least a dozen people and more to do the same amount of work. So I think that has been a really dramatic shift over the course of the century, that far, far fewer people are now involved in the actual growing of food on our farms.
One thing I should add, if you're watching and you're interested in seeing more images from the archives, the website there, if you search the letters and numbers there, you'll be able to find this and many more like it.
Yeah, I think there's I think there's sort of two sides of that. One is that the families are much smaller now than they were 100 years ago, and the other thing is that there's far fewer families involved. So in the past, while perhaps a family had 100 acres or 200 acres, now I don't know the specific numbers, but it's far more land and far fewer families. So there's two ways in which fewer people are involved in the farming, and I think that is also, we can see that in our community centers and churches and schools, that there's just far fewer people
Definitely,
around.
definitely. The next one that I wanted to show, it looks a little more like a scene we might see on a farm like yours now. Some things have changed, but certainly some things haven't.
Yes, and I think over the past year with the COVID situation, we've been incredibly fortunate in our family that we have the space outside, and the animals and our children have spent many hours watching the sheep and the lambs. So at this point, my kids know our sheep way better than I do. They know each of the sheep, and they know their life stories from last year, and who had lambs and how many and how well did they take care of them. And can tell that to me all this year as those sheep are lambing and the daughters are lambing. And we also have more ducks now because of the past year, because that seemed like a really great way to help our kids spend the time. So we have some ducks now and quail, and we might be getting some geese, goslings soon. So we definitely have similar scenes at our place of our kids taking care of the animals.
For the next one, we're going to look at here, uh, again, looks like possibly hay, and a little bit more advanced technology. We've got some sort of machinery in behind the horses, and then the men there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what do you see here? What do you see in this
I
picture?
think they're harvesting some kind of grain, so this is probably not hay, and so I guess the machine makes it into those bundles, and then the men to the left are stacking those bundles so that they can finish drying before they get brought into the barn, probably for threshing. And there, I still find it interesting that there's still three people that are walking together on the field. They can probably be having a conversation together because it's probably not super loud. And they're in quite close contact with the soil and probably able to just notice what's happening there. Nowadays, that would probably be one person in a giant combine where it's also doing steps in the process that in this old picture would have been done in a building probably several weeks later. And that person in the combine is probably about 20 feet up, like my son was in that tree when he was looking at that nest. So he's just literally physically much further away from the soil than the people were 100 years ago as they were walking and harvesting on their fields.
Something that's striking for me, looking at this one and looking at images of your farm, as well as the next one that we'll look at. You look and there's not much in the way of trees. There's maybe a wood lot in the
Yep.
background. Yeah. Um, and then this one, where it looks like the farm is carved right out of the woods. This is up on the peninsula, and a little bit different of a farm picture.
There's been lots of changes there in our area over the past 100 years, as initially there was lots of forest, then lots of that forest got cleared. I think in between then and now, there was quite a bit of reforestation and perhaps hedgerows, and the woodlots got bigger again. And now we're seeing again a lot of clearing of hedgerows and edges of forests to make fields bigger and more regular in shape to allow for the bigger machinery to come through. And there's this ongoing change in terms of removing trees, realizing that that's maybe not such a good idea, putting the trees back in, and sort of the pendulum is swinging back and forth there quite a bit.
Definitely. So the next one we're going to look at here, and this is a farm that's on the peninsula, and this house can actually, you can still see it from County Road 9. So uh, if anyone is watching from up there and wants to find the modern version of this, again, we've got a spot where it looks like most of the trees have been cleared, where it's a very open space. Uh, would this be a healthier spot with more tree cover, with more variety in the
And right now we seem to be in this kind of in-between spot where we have tree planting programs from the Conservation Authority, and I think quite a number of provincial and federal tree programs being initiated out of climate change reasons. And at the same time, right now, the rate of removal of hedgerows in both Bruce and Grey County is quite dramatic, perhaps less so further south in the counties because they were already removed. But further north where I am, it's been quite intense over the last 10 years as commodity prices have been very high and land prices have been very high and machinery has gotten bigger, that I think right now we're actually at a phase here where we're removing trees from the landscape, and I think that's quite concerning because those hedgerows are incredibly important in terms of biodiversity and providing habitat for all kinds of creatures, including birds and nesting sites, but also protecting the fields from wind erosion. And as we're losing the hedgerows, the fields are more and more exposed to winds, and we'll lose more soil as a result.
So I'm going to shift now back to your photos from Instagram. This is the one from it's just got the corner of the pond
Mm-hmm.
and the front field. Uh, has there been a moment for you? Have there been moments where you've seen the value in the way you're approaching farming and how it really is making a difference?
Yeah, I think one moment that was quite vivid for us was last spring when Tristan was cleaning out the bird boxes along our laneway, which is right beside the market garden in early spring, and he didn't just find birds. He actually found two boxes that had flying squirrels nesting in them, and that was pretty exciting. Flying squirrels are you don't see them everywhere,
No?
but they seem to be able to make a home right by the space where we are also making a livelihood. And so I think what gives me hope there is that our market garden is able to both produce food and a livelihood for us, and at the same time provide habitat for all kinds of creatures. And I think that's the way we really need to start thinking and imagining our agricultural production, that it's not either we're producing food and fiber and other materials for humans, or we're conserving landscapes for wildlife and biodiversity, but we can actually be doing both together at the same time. We can produce food and do that in a way where the landscape also is a home to many other creatures at the same time. And I think that's a real source of hope and motivation for me, that I can see it happening on our farm, and I think it's important that other people see that, and because it creates just all kinds of possibilities. We can imagine so much more if that's a possibility, that we can have both food production and wildlife habitat in the same place.
So what do you see as the balance? The balance between uh, producing food and producing food in a way that's healthy for the soil, but also being able to produce food on a large enough scale to feed the number of people that farms in Ontario need to feed.
Size of a farm will there's no one absolute size that's best. I think depending on what kind of things you're producing and the landscape that you're in, a different size will be necessary. So if you're grazing on prairies, your farm will probably be larger than if you're doing fruits in the Niagara area. So I don't think it's helpful to get too caught up in terms of an absolute acreage size. I think what's really important is that the people who are taking care of the landscape and producing food on the landscape are able to have their feet on the ground as part of how they manage it. And so if the farm has gotten so big that you're only ever in a giant machine passing over the soil. I think that's problematic because you're so literally physically distant from the soil and the landscape that it's going to be much harder to be really responsive to it and insightful about what it can do. And so I think the key part is whether how you grow food actually sees you walking that landscape and interacting with it in an intimate way so that you can see the species that are there and notice the fine variations from one part to another and be able to orchestrate those in a way to really to maximum benefit, both in terms of food production and in terms of making sure that there's places for all the other beings that live on that land.
As you were talking about it there, I was flipping forward through some of the Instagram pictures, and we've got one here that it looks like some of the earliest shoots coming up on the farm. So next, the question for our audience watching today, grade 6 students throughout Bruce County and some in Grey County as well, and there'll be some watching in the future. This will stay live until the end of the school year. So there could be some further afield. What can they do? What can they do to connect themselves to the soil, to the land they live on, and and recognize and be have a healthier relationship with the soil they live on?
I think get outside and spend time out there. And I guess maybe a really simple starting point is have a sit spot where you just go and regularly spend some time quietly and watch and listen and hear and smell what's going on around you. And it doesn't have to be a place in like pristine nature. It doesn't have to be somewhere up at the national park. It can be just, your front yard or your backyard or a place down the street where there's a few plants, and just sit quietly and see what you discover. And I think you might be very surprised at how much amazing stuff is going on there with all kinds of creatures, and let that inspire you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the opportunity, try some gardening. Plant some seeds. See if you can grow some food. Radishes are maybe a good place to start. They're pretty fast growing, and start with a few simple things and see if you can grow some of your own food.
That's something we like to do around our house too. For us, it's things that start to grow on their own. The potato that starts growing in the cupboard. We plant it. We see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And garlic is actually a good one for that too.
Exactly.
So I wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate the expertise and your contributions. And look forward to hopefully we'll get some good questions from some students out there watching, and we will see you for our panel discussion tomorrow.
That sounds wonderful. You're very welcome, and I really enjoyed seeing some of these pictures from many decades ago.
So thanks again for joining us, and to everyone out there watching, hopefully we'll see you again for a panel discussion tomorrow.